Now, hello everybody. Am I a little bit late? I am a little bit late. Oh, shame upon me, but I was sort of having a discussion. So hello everybody who is there. Joan, hello, Grace. Thank you for the season's greetings, and I return them to you and the city of Dublin. And everybody else who's there with us. I'm Robert, yes, 50 or 60 degrees, which means it's cold there. It's actually around 50, sort of 6 degrees here today, which means it's warm. You see, it's all a matter of relative location. What is warm to us is cold to you. And what is cold to you is positively summertime for us, which means I'm most grumpy. Anyway, lovely to hear that you're having beautiful weather down in Florida. Who else have we got? Marianne and Barb from Irwin, good to have you back. I'm not going to say hello to everybody because I'm saying hello to everybody in general because I'm a little bit late. And I hope you're all having a wonderful time in our final run up into the holidays. And yes, and Marty in the Old Curiosity Shop, yes, one of the more unpleasant characters that Mr. Dickens created, and Marty was rather good in it. In fact, as I said to him at the time, "You're finding this too easy to play. It makes me suspicious." Hello, John Henry. Yes, Debbie, yes, we will be doing As You Like It as a PICT OSHA course in the spring, and I may come back to that for ourselves, maybe towards the end of the summer next year, but it won't be the same. It won't ever be the same. How are we doing? Okay, you're in plenty of time. I'm a little bit late myself, so don't worry. Good to have you back. A second hello from Point Breeze. Can you have too many hellos from Point Breeze? That's what I say. We'll give people a couple of more minutes and then we'll make a start. Lots to tell you today, not just Dickens. In case you're wondering, the music is Fauré, his cello suites. And which I think I've used before and mentioned before, that we used it as background music when we did Lady Windermere's Fan. I love this. We have our second Florida from Fort Lauderdale, James. Welcome. It's nice to know we have people all around the country and the world. It's really delightful. And we do hope that you're starting to spread the word amongst your friends, because we'd love to build the family, and it's free. And in these troubled times, anything you can get for free is always worth having. Jay, I'm not sure whether it's Dickensian, but it sounds like it. It sounds like something from Oliver Twist. There's one thing, Roseanne, there, I will promise you that COVID or no COVID, pandemic or no pandemic, we will be doing these webinars every year. We'll just keep it going. There's no reason to stop. Eventually, I'll run out of things to say, and I'll go back to the beginning and say it all over again. But we will be staying with you for as long as I can talk into a camera. So don't worry about that. Lots and lots of webinars to come. So I think we're now getting close to. Oh no, we're all right. We normally wait about 3 minutes. Hello, Dennis and Carolyn from Greensburg. You see, I wouldn't start without you. I wouldn't, because I know Greensburg is so far away that it takes ages for the signal to reach you and back again. So I have to wait for you. Anyway. Yes, we're going to have a little break over the holidays, but we will be there every week come the new year. And we've made a lot of new friends through the webinar, which is great, because that's part and parcel of everything we try to do, is build the family, make new friends, find new people, and try to entertain more. So this is our hope and prayer, and the webinar certainly helps us to do that. Canada is arriving. Toronto is in. Yes, if you notice in the chat, we're sending out the message. We've been planning what we're going to be doing for webinars next year, and we've over 50 odd weeks to do. So if there are any particular topics you'd like us to discuss, not just me, but some of the other experts that we have available to us, just let us know. I mean, we have plans for Shakespeare, we have plans for all the major classics and Irish theatre. If there's anything specific, please do ask. And remember, we don't sort of sit and tell you the story of plays. We actually discuss thematics within them. So if there's any particular theme in any particular play or writer, and it doesn't just have to be playwrights, we can look at novelists and poets, but provided they have an association to theatre, please let us know, and we'll do our very best. Hello, Helen, from sunny, shady side. It's a gloriously sunny day today. The sun is positively beating down. Yes, Dennis, Eugene O'Neill is on my list. And Albee very much so, because Albee is a kind of disciple of Beckett. And we all know how I feel about Beckett. So we'll be talking more about Beckett as well. And Pinter, yes. We'll keep notes of all of these, and we will try to satisfy everybody. Hello, Jim from Greensburg. Yeah, Tennessee Williams, absolutely. Tennessee Williams, a profoundly important writer on many levels. So we'll be looking at him. Okay, so we will make a start. Now, the purpose of this particular webinar is to look at Dickens in one particular or major aspect of what I feel about Dickens. And we asked the question, well, Dickens wasn't a playwright, he was a novelist. And that is very true. But he was also a performer. And as a performer, he used his performances, his recitals, in very, very specific ways and for very, very specific purposes. Well, one of the purposes was to make money, and he made a lot. But also he wanted to use the platform, the public platform, as a methodology for expanding upon and almost sort of spreading the gospel of what he was writing. But a couple of words about him first, just for those of you who don't, and I'm sure everybody here does know, but I'll just say this anyway. His name was Charles Dickens, and he was born in 1812, and he died in 1870. Very important that. He was 58 years old when he died, young. Oh, I must notice I've left me music belting away in the background. Turn that down. Now, that's my point. He was 58 when he died. And yet, in that probably 35 odd years, he created some of the world's best known fictional characters, some of the best loved novels, and became regarded, even in his lifetime, as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era, and possibly one of the greatest novelists of all time. Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, regarded him as the greatest of all storytellers. And there is a difference, in my mind, between a novelist and a storyteller. A novel does not necessarily tell a story, but a storyteller always does. And a storyteller tends to work episodically. And if you listen to a storyteller talking, a true storyteller, you'll find that they are developing thematics as they go along. The old Irish term for this, for the storyteller, the teller of tales, the shonachie, would travel from house to house, from village to village, telling stories. Making them up as he went along sometimes, or garnering bits of information from places as he went, and adding such pieces of information into a story. A great storyteller is also a kind of a drama documentary maker who will pick up images, pick up ideas, pick up themes, pick up other stories. And if you ever listen to a true shonachie, a true storyteller, the famous Scottish comedian Billy Connolly was a classic example of that. He would not just tell a joke, he would tell a story, and each story built and built and built and became funnier and funnier and funnier. Very often the punchline wasn't huge, but it was the journey that you went on with the story. And that's the kind of way that Dickens wrote his. He was born in Portsmouth, in the very south of England. He had to, the family moved to London. He had to leave school very early because his father, who was a bit of an idiot, was imprisoned for debt. In those days, if you had a debt and if somebody brought a writ against you for debt, they would send you to prison until you paid the debt off. Now, when you think about it, that makes no sense at all. How do you pay off a debt if you're in prison? Because you can't earn any money. Anyway, you're just praying that somebody comes along with some money for you, which in fact happened to Dickens' father. But anyway, his whole family moved in. It was the Marshalsea prison, which is on Southwark, I think, was on the south side of the River Thames. The tradition was you would move into rooms in the prison and your family could live with you, and they could go out and bring in food and all of that kind of thing, but you stayed there till the debt was cleared. He used the whole notion of the debtor's prison, and this is what I mean by he's a storyteller. He would garner, he would gather, he would develop simple themes that he learnt through his life. He would use his life and his observations as the basis for all the stories he told. And all the stories he told tended to be about the absurdity of the way things worked. The experience of the Marshalsea and the debtor's prison is all there in the novel Little Dorrit. Little Dorrit is almost himself or his sister in and out of the prison helping the father. But young Dickens did not go and stay in the prison. I think there wasn't enough room, so he had to stay out and went into rooms where he was paying rent, and therefore to pay the rent and to help his father and to help feed the family in the prison, he had to work. And he went to work for a firm that made blacking, which is the sort of stuff you put on your boots to polish them. Tough job, terrible place. Working 10 to 12 hours a day for very little money. The place that he worked was at Hungerford Stairs, which very close to Charing Cross and the Strand of today's London, but part of that long perpetual stretch of docks and the more unpleasant aspects of the city back in those days. He earned apparently 6 shillings a week pasting labels on pots of bootblacking, but also mixing the bootblacking and doing all sorts of things. For a young, small boy, it was a terrible existence, and he was living in rooms, and he was alone and away from his family. In fact, this had such an influence on him that his novel David Copperfield, it's not an autobiography, but it is the most autobiographical. He uses so much of his own life in that novel. There's a character called Mr. Micawber that everybody's heard about, which is very much, I think, based on his father. Mr. Micawber always expecting something to turn up, always spending more than he had, always getting it wrong, and eventually does the only thing that anybody could do in those days. He emigrates to Australia and takes his problems with him. But Micawber, I think, was very much based on Dickens' own father. What matters is that though he wasn't born in London, he learned the streets and the alleyways of London, the city dockland, the more unpleasant aspects of the city from a very early age. And remember, he was born pre-Victorian. We think of him as the great Victorian writer, but he was actually born in 1812. Victoria didn't come to the throne until 1830 something. He was born the year that the great Napoleonic retreat from Moscow took place. Remember the 1812 overture that Tchaikovsky wrote as a celebration. The Napoleonic Wars were reshaping the whole of Europe, or had been, and in the year he was born was the year that Napoleon had his first major defeat, which was Moscow. So his childhood memory is even worse, in a way, than the later Victorian age, because there was even more poverty. So as I say, he's working as a bottle labeler, and he's working 12 to 14 hours a day and earning very little money, most of which goes to help his family. This is the point. These very often harsh working conditions are the things that made the most lasting impression on Dickens. And this is where I come to the writing aspect of it, that any great writer, any true writer, any writer writing about truth draws it from what they know. Always write what you know. Always write what you've seen. And Dickens, this incredible group of novels that he wrote, and stories, I'll give you a count in a minute, were all based on pure observation of what he saw in the world around him. And what he saw in that pre-Victorian and early to mid-Victorian period was grotesque, was appalling, was a level of contrast between the haves and the have-nots that was soul-shattering. And that became, all of that experience as a child became the basis of what you might describe as his, there's a phrase that's used about him, the reform of socio-economic and labor conditions. In today's language, we would probably say that he began to formulate socialistic thinking. And at this stage, we're talking in the mid part of the 19th century. We're talking as he's beginning to write these books as a young man, writing what he sees. We're a long way yet from socialism as a political concept, but what he is seeing is the need for something to change. The there was an old Victorian music hall song which goes, "It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor that gets the blame. It's the rich that gets the gravy. Ain't it all a bleeding shame?" And that, fundamentally, there you have it, in 4 lines of a music hall song, is the reality of the laissez-faire capitalistic system as it happened in the first, in fact, almost totally through the 19th century and well into the 20th century. He truly and rightly believed that the downsides of wealth production were unfairly borne by the poor. In other words, there was a huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots suffered on so many levels. So through his novels, he examined all that suffering. He later wrote that and this is a quote, "I wondered as a child how I could have been so easily cast away at such an age, so young, thrown out." But this happened all over, it was happening all over the beginning to be industrialized world. The world was changing. Napoleonic Wars changed so many things, and especially for Britain. So he began writing in his late teens, began writing. And even though he'd no formal education, he succeeded. I mean, this is the thing. He succeeded he edited a weekly journal for 20 years. He wrote 15 novels, some of which are the most loved novels in the world. He wrote 5 novellas, short novels, which include Christmas Carol, hundreds of short stories, literally hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles. He lectured, performed readings on both sides of the Atlantic. He wrote thousands of letters, and I don't mean, "Hello, how are you? It's lovely here. Hope to see you soon." No, I'm talking 5-6-page letters discussing major issues and minor issues and the days of serious letter writing. He campaigned for children's rights, for education, and for social reform. And he did all of that, and as I say, I remind you, he died at the age of 58. These guys died a lot younger than we do today. Remember, Oscar Wilde was only 48 when he died, so 46 when he died. So they packed a lot into their lives. I think for Dickens, for all the volume of his writings, I think the pen must hardly ever have been out of his hand. 58 when he died. But within a few years of starting to write, he'd already become, he was a celebrity. He was famous for his humor. He was famous for his satire. He was famous for the fact that the books contained characters that were so instantly recognizable, so immediately recognizable. He drew pictures with words in a way that no other writer of that time had succeeded in doing. His first novel was The Pickwick Papers, like 1836. So The Pickwick Papers, I would describe as almost a movie. His character drawing, his capacity to describe the nature of characters within that book was, I don't know if you've ever read Pickwick Papers, but if you do, and it takes a little getting into, but just simply because of the style, his capacity to create and write theatrical characters was enormous, and so young. He was, I think, what was that, being 23 or something when he wrote that? That was his first book. It also was the only novel really based on the notions of writing pure joy. It's so funny, but it's not a great social issue novel. That began after Pickwick Papers. Now, he also wrote his novels in monthly or weekly installments. That was a very fast thing to do in the Victorian period. serial publication of a narrative. And it gave you the opportunity of making sure that the audience came back and bought the next issue of the magazine, whatever it might be, because you'd left them with a cliffhanger. And had a wonderful effect on audiences, and also made them pay more. By writing installments, it's a bit like writing a TV series. That it's whether it be Star Trek, The West Wing, or Schitt's Creek, it doesn't make any difference. The same principle is there. You've got a through line of a story, but you've got episodes which have each of them an individual construct. So you might say that this idea of episodic writing was the precursor of what we would now know as the drama series on television. One of the reasons he liked doing this was because people would write to him and give feedback on what he had written for them. So he could construct his plots and he could develop his characters as he was writing the story according to the reactions he was getting from his public. Can't do that when you've written the entire book and it's that big and you can throw it and kill a rat at 50 paces. You can't change it. But if you're writing just a chapter or just a sequence and the audience say, oh, I love what's happening with that character, I think it's lovely, or oh, I don't like that one, or this one, you can bend and twist and shape your story to respond to your reader, because your reader is actually functioning like a listener. And when the Shanahi, when the teller of tales hears the audience reaction to the story he or she is telling, they can bend the story and weave it around the listener. Dickens could do that as a writer. But he also could weave topical events into his narrative. If something happened while he's writing a novel and he thinks is relevant to that novel, he can write about that topic. It doesn't have to be the exact reference to what's been going on, but he can write reference to it. And that happens with TV series. Exactly the same is happening with TV series now. So it's that same principle of writing. It's writing topically as well as a sort of a global overview of things. You can respond. And he did, so that when something ghastly happened, he could make a reference to it in his story. And his readers were not just the wealthy, not just the middle class. He was so popular that the illiterate poor, the working people, the people who'd never been to school, couldn't read themselves, would each pay a halfpenny, half a penny, to have somebody else read this month's installment to them. They wanted to hear these stories. They were so popular. He was a rock star. This also gave him an opportunity to open a new class of readers, with people who weren't reading but were listening. It was a wonder for him, because when he started to then do his own recitals, he began to realize that these stories that he had created, had concocted, were happening in the heads of the audience. Very important point. It was in 1843 he wrote the novella Christmas Carol, probably one of the most popular stories ever written at any point. Around that same period, he was writing things like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations. But with Oliver Twist, I think, was his second major novel. And it's interesting because, and Expectations comes from that period as well. These are two of the most adapted of his novels. So when we think of Oliver Twist and when we think of Great Expectations, we've seen the movies. Oliver Twist, well, one of my favorite bête noirs, that musical, which is, to my mind, a complete distortion of the novel. Forgive me, I'm sorry, I'm sure you love it. I love it too, but it's not the novel. But these stories do, because they lend themselves so easily to adaptation. The BBC, the mighty BBC drama department, has made just about every one of Dickens' novels into a TV series many times over. And each time they work majestically because, again, his characters are drawn theatrically. He thought visually. He was writing a story, not a novel. He was telling you that story through the words he wrote on the page. You can almost hear him reading it to you as you read it off the page. So he became a celebrity, became an enormous celebrity, and he used that celebrity very, very well. He was a rock star. And because of that, and because of the demand, people wanted to see him. They wanted to meet him. They wanted to hear him, both sides of the Atlantic. He was as famous over here in the States as he was back in Britain. So he did these tours, these recital tours, reading from his own works. Christmas Carol was one of the more popular ones that he would read from, but he would read from many of his works, and also his treatise on other topics as well, not simply the novels. But from all of this, and from those novels, I believe, there was a kind of indignation, a kind of resentment building in him all the way through, right through his career, a resentment against poverty. He had grown up in poverty. He had seen it firsthand. He had witnessed what it could do. He had lived in the back streets of London. He had seen it. He understood it. He talked about going out into the streets at night when nobody else would be there to watch and to listen when the underworld arose. He even though he rose above the working class from which he came, he never lost touch with that sense that the working class was suffering unduly and unnecessarily. It was always back to the unhappy period of his youth that he would find himself. He describes, I've got the quote here, in David Copperfield, as I say, the autobiographical novel, I had no advice, no counsel, no encouragement, no consolation, no assistance, no support of any kind from anyone that I can call to mind as I hope to go to heaven. Now, when you think, growing up as a child, if that statement is true, think of your own childhood, think of your own children. And then think, would you say, I had no advice, no counsel, no encouragement, no consolation, no assistance, no support of any kind from anyone? What a terrible life. How on earth do you rise above it? He did, because he had this magical gift of storytelling. But that's the way the majority of the population lived, whether they were in London or Manchester in the UK or Dublin, or whether they were in New York or Chicago or anywhere else in the United States, in Boston or any of the cities that the immigrants flowed into. There was nothing for them, nothing. They had nothing. They gave their labor for minimal wage and had nothing. That's what he resented. So once he finished the last installment of Pickwick Papers, written in installments, his next novel was Oliver Twist. And apparently he would write something like 90 pages a month, 90 to 100 pages a month. That's a lot of writing by hand. And he was also writing plays, none of which were particularly great. He was a storyteller, not a playwright. And in 1938, he published Oliver Twist. And in that, he wrote about the reality of the street children of wealthy Victorian London. London was becoming the capital of the world. It was what New York became London was way ahead of it. London was the economic epicenter of the world. And it was growing and growing and growing and growing. So the wealth was beginning to center itself, as it always does, in a relatively small group of people. Dickens wrote not about that, but about what was left over, the residue of society. And in Oliver Twist, he tells the story of corruption and abuse, the evil that was done to young children, and a thing that comes back to again and again and again in his books. The Fagin gangs, we even call them that now, Fagin gangs, gangs of young kids who go around mugging and doing other terrible things. These were not just street urchins. These were not counts. They weren't. These were monsters. And they were monsters created by society. They were created by lack of education, lack of care, lack of parents, lack of understanding, out of illegitimacy, out of so many possible sources. These street urchins had only one recourse for survival. Like all dangerous creatures, they formed packs, and these were pack animals. They would come together in packs, usually led by some corrupt adult, the Fagins of this world. And they were not just thieves, they were cutthroats, they were child prostitutes. Victorian society was every bit as corrupt as our own. And the Fagins of London controlled the mobs. I mean, just like the Godfather would control the families, the Fagins controlled the mobs of kids, and they were abused. And if people think I'm exaggerating, go back to the text of Oliver Twist. There's a moment in it when we did the adaptation for the stage, we put the line in because it's in the book. When Fagin is going to beat the hell out of Oliver, Nancy throws herself between them and pushes Fagin back and screams at him, "I was tarting for you when I was half his age." This was the London that Dickens was talking about, and this was the London that he wanted to bring to light. The importance of this is that it worked, that this series of novels worked and changed people's thinking. But he did it very cleverly. He didn't do it by preaching. He just told the truth. And he even made people laugh while he was telling them the truth. He made them laugh not merely at the characters in the books and the absurd things that people will do out of ignorance and poverty. Ignorance and poverty. I'll come to those 2 points again in a minute. But it was a constant nagging underneath the genius of storytelling that actually caused change to occur. You take the novel Nicholas Nickleby. I'm not going to go through the whole story because you want to read the story, read the book. Brilliant book. And if you can ever get to see it, it's still available somewhere as the famous 9-hour version that the Royal Shakespeare Company did with Roger Rees as Nicholas Nickleby. And if you saw The West Wing, he's the guy who played the British ambassador. But his Nicholas Nickleby was amazing. But the point I want to come to in that is, again, in all of these novels, he tackled so many things, so many social issues that really mattered, that nobody else was really dealing with. In Nicholas Nickleby, we come back to children again. And it's an examination of the private schools that were springing up all over the place for unwanted additional children. How to get rid of, if you couldn't be bothered dealing with your kids, send them off to a private school. And most of these institutions were dreadful. They were bordering on evil. So in Nicholas Nickleby, he writes of one. He gives Nickleby a job as a teacher. So he goes off to this school out in the country, and it's called Do the Boys Hall. Yeah, DOTHEBOYS. Do the Boys Hall. That's what Dickens called it. And it's run by a character called Wackford Squeers. Wackford Squeers. That's how it's spelt. Dickens knew exactly what he was doing, and also the word whack. It's a scam school. It's the kind of place, and they were all over England, and they were totally corrupt, where for a modest fee they would take your children off your hands, many of whom were illegitimate or crippled or deformed, and families didn't want having them around, so you send them off to these schools. And for a modestly high fee, you would have your child starved, mistreated, and let the owners of these schools pad their own pockets. The degree and the level of education was minimal, and the example being that in the book that Squeers, the guy who runs the school, Do the Boys Hall, actually is almost illiterate himself. But the families didn't care. The people didn't care. Get them out, get them out, get them out. And the government didn't care. Nobody cared. These children were left to suffer, left alone. Dickens cared. Dickens cared deeply, so he constructed an entire story around, within Nickleby about a young boy who had been sent to this school, who was not simple, just physically weak, and becomes a major featured character within the novel to demonstrate the cruelty of this system. And again, because of the novel, because of Dickens' persistence, things did begin to change. Not dramatically, not immediately, but they did begin to change. Dickens was never afraid to use the words that would cause shock, surprise, and change. Because the two things that he hated most were hunger, poverty, need, and ignorance, lack of education. So what he was doing was using, in a very theatrical sense, through the novel. As I say, you read his novels, it's like reading a TV series. He wanted to expose the truth, but in a way that was palatable enough that people would actually go with it, rather than propagandist ranting that everybody would say, no, I don't want to listen to that. If you laugh at something and then you enjoy something, it begins to implant in the brain. That's what he was such a genius at. It was a kind of a brainwashing propaganda that was so subtle because of the genius of its writing. It began to take effect. People did begin to question. Now, he wasn't the only one in society that was doing this, but it was that chipping away, chipping away, chipping away. And Dickens made a major contribution to this that did begin to change Victorian society. The Victorian world was quite, the Victorian world in England was quite remarkable. We must remember that Britain at this point was beginning to build its empire. And once you start to build empires, money starts to come flooding in. And if there is one thing, and power follows it. And as Lord Acton's famous dictum, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that was what was happening. Victorian Britain became the perfect example. If we look at the great powerhouses of America at the beginning of the 20th century, they are simply based upon the great powerhouses of Victorian Britain in the middle of the 19th century. And the poor get poorer. Dickens sees this. So he writes others. He writes, for instance, The Old Curiosity Shop. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Again, dealing with curses that are, sorry, I'm just going to adjust something. Just bear with me. Technology. I'd be much better off with a megaphone shouting at you wherever you are. Anyway, Old Curiosity Shop, same thing. Grinding poverty, abuse of a child, not simply by the monstrous character Quilp, who somebody mentioned, Marty Giles's brilliant performance in that role, which is monstrous and evil and also pedophilic. That was another issue that was happening. The corruption of children, the pedophilic corruption of children in the Victorian era was absolutely common. But it's also the curse of gambling. The lovely old grandfather is the person who's caused most of the problems for the child, because whenever he can, he gambles away whatever he can. Even the money that she has sewn into her dress to keep them alive, he will pick it out and spend it. So Dickens doesn't soften the blow in any way, and there is no happy ending for little Nell. She dies. She dies because that's what happens. There is the lovely story, by the way, about because of the episodic thing and I might have mentioned this before, that in New York, when the ship arrived that was carrying the last edition of the magazine with the last chapters of the Old Curiosity Shop in it, there were queues down at the docks waiting for the magazine to come off the ship because they wanted to know what happened to little Nell. That's how powerful a writer he was. On the other end of the scale, Oscar Wilde, another rather powerful, later in the Victorian period, expressed his distaste for such things by saying, a man must have a heart of stone to read of the death of little Nell without laughing. So it didn't always work for everybody. But again, we have a book, episodic, developing, going along, picking up ideas as he's writing it, developing those characters as he's writing them, and dealing with social issues, pedophilia, gambling, families losing everything because somebody in that family believes that they can win. Another reflection of his own father. Bleak House, how law can really mess you up. One of the central themes of Bleak House, and it's a very long, convoluted story, but one of the major themes in that is a lawsuit about a will. And it's called, in the Court of Chancery, it's called The Case of John Dice and John Dice. And it's all to do about somebody who left not one will, but several wills, and they're going to be worked out in court. And it goes through the entire novel. And it takes so long to solve that by the end of it, there's no money left. Some of the critics felt that the theme was a bit exaggerated, but as Dickens so accurately pointed out in Oliver Twist, the law is an ass. He wrote actually in the preface of his the first edition that there were precedents for this fictitious case. One such case, there was a will which was read in 1797, was contested in court, and was finally enacted in 1859, 60 years to agree on the reading of a will. That was the way the law worked. The legal profession, of course, were delighted because all the proceeds of the will were being spent on them in their fees. But the novel actually did support judicial reform, and there was a law passed, I think it was in 1870, that stopped that kind of nonsense because people were being literally deprived of their inheritance because of tiny things in the law. But as we all know, if the lawyers can find one tiny little thing, they'll take it to court and try to overturn the will of the people. Anyway, Hard Times, another novel based around a school, the principal of a school. Also other characters, and again, very long, convoluted stories, absolutely delightful. Some of his most wonderful characters. It's also his shortest novel. If you haven't read Dickens and you want to have a go, start on something, the two I would recommend, apart from Christmas Carol, would be Oliver Twist and Hard Times. And there's one wonderful, well, there's this school inspector and senior, he opened, the novel opens, what I want is facts. Teach these young boys and girls nothing but facts. He's an industrialist. He's a man of power. He's a man who deals in metal. He's a man who wants facts. He doesn't want people being educated. He wants them being taught facts that will be useful when he employs them. There's a wonderful young girl, Sissy, and her father works in the circus. And so because her father works in the circus, Gradgrind, at the very beginning, demands the definition of a horse. Define me a horse. Tell me what a horse is. And she can't do it. She can't tell him what a horse is as a fact, because she only sees it as an entity. And so one of her classmates gives the sort of the definition, the zoological definition of what a horse is. Sissy is beaten because she suggests that she would carpet a floor with pictures of flowers or horses. It shows that Dickens had an understanding of the child's imagination as opposed to the demands of rigorous and unfeeling systemic approach to education. He wanted to bring out what was inside a child's soul, inside a child's imagination, not pump it full of irrelevant facts. If you think back, all the facts you learnt when you were in high school or before middle school, how many of them were actually useful to you? How useful has algebra been? Come on, be honest. How useful? Not a lot. You still use your calculator. So I could go on about these novels and how he was using them to demonstrate what was wrong in society and how it needed to be changed. And one of the most popular of these was unquestionably, and I'm looking at the time because I'm running out, and I would end with this one, wouldn't I? In 1843, he published a novella, a short book, a short novel called A Christmas Carol. I think probably the whole world knows Christmas Carol, and that it tells the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, who's a miser, and is visited by a ghost of his old business partner, and he's visited by three spirits of past, present, and yet to come. And because of the visits and because of all of that, he becomes a nice, kinder, gentler human being. Now, as I was saying, he wrote Christmas Carol during a period when Victorian Britain was really becoming, it was discovering a new sense of identity. It had a growing empire in the post-Napoleonic world. The British military, and especially the British Navy, were the dominant superpower of the world. Exactly what America is today, Britain, in that post-Napoleonic world, were the dominant superpower. It was a world where Britannia really did rule the waves, and the sea lanes of commerce were controlled to a large extent by Britain. So Britain, in all this, in new and growing wealth, had an opportunity of sort of reevaluating itself. And amongst those were the reevaluations of past traditions. And the Queen and her husband, Prince Albert, really encouraged her. Albert, who was a great educationalist and a great reformer like Dickens, started to bring in, to re-examine all the great traditions. Christmas was not a big thing before this. It was there, but it wasn't a major thing. So the introduction of things like Christmas carols, the actual carols themselves, or the reintroduction of them, and Christmas traditions, normally it had been celebrated as Yuletide, which was an old Nordic Viking thing. You know, you burned the Yule log. But Albert introduced other things, the Tannenbaum, the Christmas tree. He introduced it from Germany. The royal family would have their Christmas celebration at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, which was her favorite residence. Rather the way the present royal family in England have their Christmas in Scotland, Queen Victoria and Albert and all her children. If you ever across in the south of England, go to the Isle of Wight, go and look at Osborne House. It is it's still exactly as it was when Victoria and Albert lived there. But they brought in these new customs of Christmas, and Dickens almost cashed in on that by bringing out this wonderful story of Christmas. But it was, and it really was an incredible success. It was, I'm going to get my dates. It was published on the 19th of December, 1844. And by Christmas Eve, what's that, 6 days, it was completely sold out. By the end of the following year, 13 more editions had been published. This became the most popular. This leaves Harry Potter nowhere. This is bigger than Lord of the Rings. Christmas Carol was so popular because it gave people a real sense, a new sense of what Christmas should be all about. So successful that by 1849 he began public readings of the story, and 127 individual performances of him reading A Christmas Carol between 1870 and the day he died. And it has never been out of print. It sort of, I suppose in a way, I mean, it's been made into movies, it's been made into it's been made into movies, TV series, radio versions, because it defined what Christmas should represent. Family gatherings, food, drink, dancing, games, generosity of spirit, something that went from the religious significance, but grew out of that into a social significance, a time when we should care for one another. It's still that same message. It's still that same message of, if we have it, we must share it. So many of the themes that he investigated in the other novels are there in A Christmas Carol. Poverty, greed, selfishness, generosity, childhood isolation, love, lost love, and that death is the end of it for all of us. And that what you possess at death is nothing except the reputation you leave behind you. That was the big message. That was the big thing. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That basic message, that no matter what you accrue in your life, no matter what you may do, if you die, you don't take it with you, and the only thing left behind you is what people say about you, what people feel about you, how people remember you. In the great tradition of storytelling, Christmas Carol is the tale of a journey, but it's the journey of life. And all his other novels show aspects of that journey, from Old Curiosity Shop, The Journey of Little Nell, The Journey of Nicholas Nickleby, to finding love and to finding happiness, The Journey of David Copperfield, Through a Life, The Journey of Oliver Twist, through appalling deprivation and cruelty to finding his family. All of these are about journeys. They are stories being told of a journey, and Christmas Carol is the kind of culmination of that, because it shows all the roads one might have walked and the paths you actually chose and the wrong turns that you took. It's the tale of a good man who lost his way. It is not the story of a bad man who becomes a good man. It is the story of a man who has lost his way, but by being given sort of the blessing of finding his wrong turns, of going back and looking at the wrong turns he has made, and looking at the wrong turns he is making, and seeing what the result of those wrong turns will lead him to, he is redeemed. And I think at the end of the day, That's the Christmas gift that we could all use. As I said before in some other talk, sorry, I've got my notes again. The old Robbie Burns Scottish line, Lord, the grace to be us, to see ourselves as others see us. If we could only see ourselves, if we could only look at those turns in the road that were wrong, those turns in the road that led us down a bad direction, that made us selfish, that made us mean, that did all of this. Dickens shows us brilliantly in A Christmas Carol. And that brings us neatly to the end of today, but I want to say a couple of other things. I think we've spent a lot of time, in fact, I think this is webinar 36. I'm not actually counting, but I think it is. And we've looked at an awful lot of theatre and an awful lot of writers, and we've examined some of Shakespeare and other things. And as we come to the end of the year, and I look at these sort of things, I'm talking about Dickens, not a playwright, and find that that same theme is true throughout all of it. That all literature, all art, certainly all literary art, and I include theatre within that, is all about that journey. It's about looking at different aspects of the journey of life. So it's been, for me, a rather fascinating experience. And we're now, we're going to take a break because it is Christmas and Hanukkah and New Year. And so we're going to take, because we've an awful lot of end of year stuff to do with the company, we're going to take a break of about 3 weeks. And we'll be back on the 8th of January with for the whole of next year, but we're going to have a little break between now and then, because I also want to sort of plan some more general conversations and webinars. And it does take a bit of planning, not a lot, but a bit. So I just got a couple of messages. Christmas is coming, and so is, we all got that. Many of you who email us will have it in your email. Many of you will have it in your snail mail as well. But Christmas Carol, the PICT presentation, which we've done as a radio drama, is going to start online on December 16th, which I think is Wednesday of next week. And it'll be running right the way through to January 3rd, to the end of the year. So, and into the beginning of next year. And it's a full production. It's wonderful. It's got a lot of picked regular actors. It's got Martin Giles as Ebenezer Scrooge, and Jim Fitzgerald as Bob Cratchit, and Karen Baum as Mrs. Cratchit, and Lisanne, and oh God, there's so many people. Visser and all the regular actors that you love. They're all in it. It's gorgeous. We spent nearly 3 weeks putting the whole thing together, and I promise you, it's really, really good. And there's carols, and there's you'll be able to look at these wonderful illustrations that we've commissioned, and it's the true story of Christmas Carol. We haven't softened it, we haven't eased it. We're telling you the story as Dickens wrote it, and it's so beautiful. I do hope that you take a little bit of trouble, log in, go through the paywall. It's very cheap. It's $15 and change for the registration fee, that kind of thing. But it's really, really worth it, and I hope you do. I want to say a big word of thank you to all of those who gave on the Big Give Day. Thank you so much. It was our best Big Give Day ever. It's not too late. Our fall appeal is still running. So if you still feel that you would like to give something and you haven't yet, or better still, if you have and you'd like to give a little more, go to the website, please, please. Everything matters. Every dollar counts, and we are looking for as many dollars as we can collect. So that's about it. From all of us at PICT, thank you for being with us. Thank you for staying with these webinars. I don't feel lonely at all on a Friday afternoon. I know that there's so many of you out there willing to listen to me rabbit on about theatre. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy COVID-free New Year. We will see you all in January. Wear your mask, wash your hands. Bye now.